I stood in the kitchen, staring at the simmering pot on the stove, my hands trembling ever so slightly as I tried to maintain some semblance of composure. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary, the fragrance lingering in the air like a mask over the suffocating tension that had been building inside me for days. I was trying to hold everything together, pretending that this evening would be just like any other. The sound of David's car pulling into the driveway made my stomach tighten, but I forced myself to keep stirring the sauce, trying to focus on the task at hand. For years, I had lived in this perfect little bubble, a life most people would envy: beautiful house, a perfect husband, and a daughter who, on the surface, seemed to be our shared joy. But it had all been a lie. And tonight, I could no longer keep the truth buried under the layers of deception. I had made my bed, and now, I was preparing to lie in it. But the question was, could I live with the consequences? Or was I already too far gone to turn back? The front door opened with a creak, and David's voice echoed from the hallway, calling out my name. Emma? His voice was warm, like it always was, but there was an edge to it that I hadn't noticed before, an undercurrent of something unspoken. I wasn't sure if he was still upset about the argument we had earlier that morning, something about finances, a minor disagreement, but it didn't matter now. Everything felt insignificant compared to the weight of what I was about to confess. I turned off the stove and wiped my hands on a dish towel before walking toward the hallway. There he was, standing at the threshold of the living room, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened slightly. He looked the same as he always did, calm and collected, as if nothing in the world could ever rattle him. How I wished I could be like him, unaffected by the chaos I'd created. "Dinner smells good," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How was your day?" I tried to smile back, but it felt forced, as though my face couldn't quite keep up with my mind. "It was fine," I muttered. "Just the usual." He nodded and set his briefcase down on the couch before making his way to the kitchen. I followed him, my heart thudding in my chest as I watched him grab a wine glass from the cabinet. He poured a generous amount of red wine, took a sip, and then looked at me, waiting for me to speak. I knew I couldn't keep hiding the truth from him anymore. I'd convinced myself for so long that the lie was the easiest path, the safest path. But there were no safe paths left. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. David set the glass down and turned to face me, his expression shifting, a flicker of concern passing through his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, the edge in his tone unmistakable now. I took a deep breath, my throat tight, and looked at him, really looked at him. The man I had promised to spend my life with. The man who thought our daughter, Lily, was his. I could already see the anger building in him, the suspicion. I had to say it, there was no turning back now. I wasn't honest with you," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "About Lily. She's not yours. She's Jonathan's." The room went still. It was as if the entire world had stopped moving, holding its breath. David stared at me, his face blank, unreadable, as if trying to process what I had just said. For a moment, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me correctly. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But then his expression hardened, his jaw tightening as the truth began to sink in. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, his eyes narrowing, and I could feel the heat of his glare as it burned through me. It was the same look I had seen in him when we'd first met, intense, captivating, but now, it felt like the light had gone out of him. He was a stranger to me, a stranger I had betrayed. "What did you say?" His voice was low, but there was an unmistakable edge to it now, a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. I had an affair," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "With Jonathan. I did it for the money, for security. And I lied to you, David." I lied to you about everything. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. His face twisted with anger, and I could see the muscles in his neck tensing as he tried to hold it together. I could feel the air between us crackling with the weight of my confession. "How could you do this to me?" he hissed, his voice shaking with rage. "To us? You've been lying to me this whole time, Emma?" I was scared, I whispered, the tears threatening to spill over. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I kept it hidden, if I kept pretending, maybe things would be okay." His eyes burned into me, full of disbelief. "You think this is okay? You think I can just forget what you've done?" "I didn't want to hurt you," I said, my voice breaking. "But I've hurt you anyway." David took a step back, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he muttered, his voice distant, cold. I reached for him, desperate, but he recoiled, stepping further away. "David, please. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But it was too late." His expression was hardening, closing off, and I could feel the walls between us building higher and higher. The man I had known, the man I had loved, was slipping away from me, piece by piece. He turned toward the door, grabbing his jacket from the couch. "I can't do this right now," he said, his voice low, the weight of finality in every word. I watched as he walked toward the door, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "David, please," I begged, my heart pounding. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer. He just opened the door, walked out, and slammed it behind him. I stood there, frozen, my body trembling with the aftershock of everything I had just confessed. I had told him the truth, and now, I was left with the consequences of my actions. The silence that filled the house felt suffocating, the weight of my guilt pressing down on me as I tried to wrap my mind around what had just happened. And then I heard it, the soft, innocent sound of Lily's voice from upstairs. "Mom?" My heart broke all over again. I had just lost everything. The house was silent when I woke up the next morning, and I immediately knew something was wrong. The light that filtered through the curtains seemed harsh, like it was judging me, forcing me to face the reality of what I had done. I hadn't heard David come back. And I hadn't heard from him since last night. My heart ached with each passing second, but I didn't dare move. I couldn't. Not yet. The sound of Lily's footsteps echoed down the hall, her tiny feet pattering against the wooden floor. She was up early as always, her cheerful presence a stark contrast to the dark cloud that hung over me. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, wishing for everything to go back to how it had been. But that wasn't going to happen. "Mom?" she called out softly, her voice filled with innocent curiosity. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile as I opened my eyes and turned to face her. "Good morning, sweetie," I said, my voice trembling just a little. Lily ran into the room and climbed up on the bed, her small arms wrapping around me as she snuggled close. She didn't know what had happened, didn't know what I had done. How could she? I could barely understand it myself. "Is Dad coming home soon?" she asked, her face filled with hope. I couldn't bring myself to answer her immediately. I had no idea where David was. All I knew was that the man who had walked out that night had taken my heart with him, and now I was left with nothing but an emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. I had no words to give her, so I just held her tighter, my own fear consuming me. "I don't know, sweetie," I whispered, my voice breaking. Lily looked up at me with wide eyes. "Why is Dad so mad?" I closed my eyes briefly, unsure of how to explain it to her. What could I say? How could I possibly explain the betrayal, the lies, the consequences of my actions to her? She was only 5 years old. She deserved to be in a world of innocence and joy, but I had torn that world apart with one selfish decision. "He's just upset, honey," I said, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "But he loves you." "We both do." Lily nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand why her father wasn't there, why things weren't the same. And I couldn't give her any answers. Not yet. After a few minutes, I forced myself to get up and start the day. I couldn't hide from this reality forever. I needed to face the consequences, to somehow make things right. But I knew deep down that I couldn't undo what I had done. I couldn't unring the bell, no matter how much I wished I could. I grabbed my phone and checked for messages, but there was nothing from David. No missed calls, no texts. Just silence. My hands shook as I dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice steady. "David, it's me. Please, I just want to talk. I know I've messed up, but please, don't shut me out. We need to figure this out. I need you." But I knew even as I spoke that it wasn't that simple. I had betrayed him. And the damage wasn't just to our marriage, it was to our family. I tried calling again, but this time it rang for longer before it went to voicemail. I hung up and stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to try again. But then I thought about Lily. She was upstairs, waiting for me to make everything okay again, and I realized I couldn't keep hiding behind this phone. I had to fix this, even if it meant facing the hardest conversation of my life. I went upstairs and found Lily sitting on the bed, playing with her dolls. Her small fingers moved carefully as she set them up in little scenarios, her imagination running wild, oblivious to the storm that had just engulfed our world. For a moment, I wanted to freeze time, to keep her in this moment of innocence forever. But I couldn't. Time was moving, and I was moving with it, whether I was ready or not. "I'm going to take a shower," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be down in a little bit, okay?" Lily looked up and smiled, nodding enthusiastically. "Okay, Mom." I left her alone in the room, the door creaking closed behind me. As I stepped into the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering who I had become. The woman who had stared back at me seemed so unfamiliar. The face I saw wasn't the one I had worn for years, the one that was full of confidence, of love, of purpose. Now, all I saw was regret. After a quick shower, I dressed in something simple, nothing too fancy, nothing that would make me feel like I was trying to cover up what I had done. I couldn't cover it up. I couldn't pretend anymore. I walked downstairs slowly, the weight of my decisions heavier with every step. The house felt empty without David's presence, and Lily's laughter, which had once seemed like a comfort, now felt like a reminder of what I was about to lose. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in front of me. My mind raced with thoughts of David. Should I call him again? Should I go to him, beg for forgiveness? Would he even listen to me? What if he never came back? What if this was the end? I couldn't bear the thought. I tried to calm myself, to think logically, but logic seemed irrelevant now. What was the point of reasoning when everything was already broken? I had taken Lily from Jonathan, and I had taken David's trust. Now, I had to face the consequences, but I couldn't figure out where to start. I thought about Jonathan, the man who had given me everything I had wanted but never truly loved me. It had been all about the money, all about the security. I knew that if I went to him now, he would offer no comfort, no help. He had already made it clear that I was nothing more than a means to an end. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that David was the one I needed. the man I had betrayed. But how could I ever expect him to forgive me? And more than that, how could I fix the damage I had done to our family? Lily's laughter echoed downstairs, a cruel reminder of the life I had ruined. I needed David to come back. But I didn't know if he ever would. And deep down, I wasn't sure I deserved it if he did. The phone rang suddenly, jolting me from my thoughts. I grabbed it, my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't David. It was Jonathan. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me pushed me to pick up. Emma, Jonathan's voice came through the line, cold and distant. We need to talk. And just like that, I knew my nightmare was only beginning. I stood there, staring at the phone for a moment longer before I finally pressed it to my ear. Jonathan's voice was as sharp and detached as I remembered, but something in it sent a chill down my spine. I had known the man for years, but never had I felt such a cold distance between us. We need to talk, he repeated, his tone flat, without any trace of the warmth he had once shown me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What could he possibly want now? Was this some sort of punishment for my betrayal? Was he going to throw me out of his life completely, just as David had done? I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to steady itself. About what? About Lily, Jonathan replied, his words sharp as a knife. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about her. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean, he answered, his impatience evident. I've been patient with you, Emma. I've played my part in your little game, but it's gone on long enough. I want her, and I want her now. The words hit me like a physical blow. He wanted her? What was he talking about? He had never shown any real interest in being a father to her. All this time, I had kept him at arm's length, never letting him near her, never letting him claim what was rightfully his. But now he was demanding her. You can't just take her, I said, my voice trembling with the fear and disbelief that was building inside me. She's my daughter. I've raised her. She's my family. I'm her biological father, Emma, Jonathan said, his voice full of ice. And it's time you accepted that. I couldn't breathe. Everything inside me felt like it was collapsing, like I was suffocating under the weight of my choices. What had I done? I had been so focused on keeping my lies hidden, so desperate to hold on to the life I had built with David, that I hadn't thought about the consequences for Lily. Now, everything was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I closed my eyes, trying to compose myself. I'm not going to let you take her, I said, my voice hoarse, but resolute. I'll fight you, Jonathan. I'll fight you with everything I have. You can't stop me, he retorted, the certainty in his words cutting deeper than any knife could. I'll get her, whether you like it or not. And with that, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. What had I just done? What was I supposed to do now? Lily's voice from the hallway interrupted my thoughts. Mom? Who was that on the phone? I turned quickly, wiping away the tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. She stood in the doorway, her big eyes filled with innocence, a question in her gaze. She didn't know the chaos swirling around us, the nightmare I had created. She didn't know that the man I had once trusted, the man who was supposed to love us both, was gone. She didn't know that her real father, Jonathan, was demanding her back. I took a deep breath and forced a smile. It was someone I used to know, sweetie. Nothing to worry about. But Lily wasn't convinced. She stared at me for a long moment, her innocent gaze unrelenting, before she finally broke into a smile and ran to me. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, almost desperate to hold on to her, to keep her from knowing the truth. "Mom," she said softly, "when's Dad coming home?" I stiffened, my heart breaking all over again. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? How could I explain to her that the man she thought of as her father was never really hers to begin with? "I don't know," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "But I'll make sure you're okay. I promise." She nodded, her small hands clutching at me, and I realized that I had to protect her now. No matter what happened with David or Jonathan, Lily needed me more than ever. I spent the next few hours in a daze, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I tried calling David again, but once more, it went straight to voicemail. I left another message, my voice shaking. "David, please. Please just listen to me. I'm sorry for everything. I need you. Lily needs you." But even as I left the message, I knew it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to change anything. David wasn't coming back. And Jonathan wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. I thought about the house, about the life we had built together. I thought about the promises I had made to David, the life I had stolen from him. And then I thought about Lily, our daughter, who deserved so much more than this mess I had created. I had been selfish. I had been wrong. And now I was going to lose everything. It was late in the afternoon when I finally got a response, not from David, but from my lawyer. He had gotten my message, and we set up a meeting for the next day. He promised to help me with the custody battle, but even as he spoke, I knew that the fight was going to be long, painful, and most likely, unsuccessful. By the time I hung up, I was already preparing myself for what was coming. I couldn't go back, and I couldn't fix what I had done. But I had to fight for Lily. I couldn't let Jonathan take her away from me. She was my daughter. And I would do anything, to keep her. The night fell in silence. The house was dark and quiet, and I sat there in the living room, holding Lily as she slept. She didn't know the battle that was brewing, the war that was about to unfold. But I did. I knew that the life we had once known was gone, and that the future would be a fight for survival. David had walked away. Jonathan was coming for Lily. And I was left standing at the edge of a broken life, staring into the abyss. But one thing was certain, I would not let go without a fight. And with that resolve, I knew the war had only just begun.